Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast, and we have made it to Adventures in the Forgotten Realms preview week. I am so excited to be here, and to help us show off the set, I have brought in a slew of guests, and today we are joined by a true luminary of Wizards. Welcome to the show, James Wyatt.
Hi, everybody. My name is James Wyatt. I'm a senior designer for the Dungeons & Dragons team at Wizards of the Coast.
So glad to have you here, James. Now, you've been at Wizards for a long time, and to me, you're like almost a famous person inside the building. But for everyone out there who doesn't know you, what is your background here at Wizards?
So yeah, I've been there a long time. I started working on the D&D team in 2000. I worked on D&D for 14 years, and then I took a little sojourn over onto the Magic World Building team for like 6.5 years. I'm now back on D&D, having done what I set out to do, which is forever intermingle the two brands.
Yeah, I'd say you definitely accomplished your goal, and it was quite a path here. So first of all, I am curious though, James, I actually don't even know the answer to this. How did you come to Wizards in the first place? What was your background before coming to us in 2000?
So a great many years ago, a lifetime or two ago, I was a United Methodist pastor in two small churches in southeastern Ohio, which I found drained a lot of energy from me. And to refresh my energy, I started writing D&D stuff and seeking publication for that. So it was not too long after that, I started getting stuff published in Dragon and Dungeon magazines when we still published print magazines for D&D. And that led me into full-time freelancing for a little while I was also doing things like writing user documentation for medical record software, which actually turns out is really good experience for writing D&D stuff. After working for the magazines for like 4 years, I got a job on the design team for D&D, and that's the happy ending, I guess, of the story that's been going on for 21 years now.
Or at least the happy beginning, perhaps, in some ways. Do you remember what the first thing you got published in Dragon magazine was?
I sure do. It was an article called Mystics, Miracles, and Meditations, an expansion for the Mask of the Red Death setting, which was a branch of the Ravenloft campaign setting for D&D, second edition. I remember it very well because I got my copy of that magazine on the day that my daughter was born.
So you brought Magic and D&D together, as you said, which is super exciting. And we're seeing that now with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. But it's actually not the first time Magic and D&D have come together. And this is something you really helped make happen with Plane Shift. Now, what was that, James, and how exactly did it come about?
It actually got started right after I left the D&D team and joined the Magic World Building team in 2014. The first thing that I worked on was the art book that we did in partnership with Viz Media for the Battle for Zendikar set. I've always loved D&D, and it was kind of a hobby for me at that point when it was no longer my job to work on taking the information I was presenting about the world for the art book and translating that into the terms that you'd need to run a D&D campaign there. So I did that just sort of on my own, but a couple of people were talking to me and saying we should totally publish this in some form. And eventually I found a brand manager on my side, and we walked around the fourth floor and asked people if we could do this. And kind of to our surprise, we couldn't find anybody to say no because it was the conventional wisdom established at the company that we don't mix the brands. So we published that as a PDF not long after the art book came out. So then I kept doing that for the art books.
And you can still find all of those online as PDFs now, right? So if you want to go play in Zendikar or Amonkhet or Innistrad, it's all out there.
It is. They're available on DM's Guild website for free.
So you did that for a while, basically a total labor of love to make these things happen. And then after a while, they kept getting more and more popular. And then a little while back, we saw something new happen. We got a full-on book released. What was the creation of that like?
I'm not actually sure what the behind the scenes workings on the D&D team were that made that happen. But at some point, folks came to me and said, okay, we want to do a Ravnica book, and I joined into those conversations, and the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica was born. That was definitely a culmination of all the work I've been doing on Plane Shift, as you said.
Well, I have to say, it's so cool when you go through like D&D Beyond or something, and you go to create your character, it's just there. Magic is just there as a drop-down box of things you can choose now, right? You can choose to be a Loxodon or whatever other race you want, and it really is, as you said, forever intermingled with Magic, right? You came in, you made your mark, and now that you're back on the D&D side, Magic will forever be part of D&D now, and vice versa, which I think is so cool. I mean, do you think, and I know you're a very humble person, James, but do you think that we would be at Adventures in the Forgotten Realms today without the initial work you did on Plane Shift? Do you think we would have got here eventually, or do you feel like it was really took one person kind of pushing for this to happen to get us to here in the first place?
I'm sure we would have gotten here eventually. I mean, I've been telling the story a lot. I remember when I started at Wizards in 2000, there was discussion about doing a Dominaria monster book for D&D. I thought for a while that was going to be one of the first projects that I worked on. But it got killed because of that sentiment of not crossing the streams, not mixing the brands. But sooner or later, that conversation has been going on since Wizards purchased Dungeons and Dragons in 97. So it was bound to happen eventually.
Well, I am so glad we are finally here and we get to live in the world where Adventures in the Forgotten Realms comes out and under our watch. This set is so exciting and full of tons of cool stuff. And James, what was your role on this set? What did you do here?
I was the creative lead for the set. Every Magic set has a creative lead who works with the art directors and other members of the world building team to put together a world guide, and works with the set designers throughout the whole process, set design and play design, to keep the creative focus of the set where it should be. It was a pretty easy job, actually, because the world was well established already, and all the designers working on the set deeply loved D&D. So sometimes I was a conservative voice on that team saying, that's a little far out for D&D, or a kind of fringe part of D&D. And sometimes I was just like, woohoo, yeah, let's do it.
What was your biggest woohoo, yeah, let's do it moment from the set?
Oh, what a great question. And I cannot think of an answer. It was so long ago.
That is the challenge, right? We work on these things years in advance. All the work we did on Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is long gone, but I'm sure there were many, many awesome moments for you. So you've worked on a lot of creative teams in the past. Now this time we're doing Dungeons and Dragons. What was different about how creative approached this set as opposed to a normal set? I mean, I know you said that there was a rich world already there to explore, which was great, but how did that impact how you wanted to creatively tackle what was going on in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms?
The biggest task, I think, was figuring out how the Magic rules and game were going to overlay onto the world of the Forgotten Realms. Everything from, okay, we need to make sure that the character classes established in D&D have a clear identity and are recognizable on cards, and how they're going to fit into the various colors, and then all the monsters, creature types and colors for monster cards as well. There was also an aspect of trying to make sure that we could clearly define the look for some of the places in the Forgotten Realms. For all the game products that have been put out in Forgotten Realms over the years, there's not as much like awesome landscape art as you would hope for, not as much as we needed for just the land cards in the set, right? So a really cool, fun part of building the world guide for this was, all right, let's see the spine of the world. Let's see the Evermoors. Let's see the High Forest, Neverwinter Wood, and the Mirror of Dead Men, and making sure that we had some good visuals to refer to.
Now, I remember in the design of this set, something that I heard was that D&D has a ton of great villains, right? It's known for its villains really, really well. You have characters like Lolth who are so well ingrained in D&D lore. But heroes were a bit more of a challenge, is that right?
Yeah, and that is really always D&D's problem, because fundamentally D&D is a game about making a character who is the hero of the story. And for every person who plays D&D, that's a different character. Obviously, D&D and the Forgotten Realms specifically have long and successful histories of novels and other forms of storytelling. So we have characters that I think many players will recognize from novels, from some well-known and some very obscure video games and comic books and sources like that. We were definitely able to fill the ranks of many legendary creatures in the set with heroes as well as villains, but that is always the tricky part. The shape of the D&D audience right now is such that somebody like the Xanathar is immediately well known to D&D players of today, where someone like Dritz de Werden, it might not be immediately recognized because he hasn't been on the cover of a D&D source book.
I love that you just have Xanathar's Guide to Everything on hand, right? I mean, it truly is a guide to everything. It just makes sense to have right there.
This is my D&D bookshelf right here next to me because, it's my job.
So you mentioned bringing in a variety of tropes and races and characters to the world. Is there one that you're most excited about? Something that you are really excited we finally got to do in Magic?
There's a lot of things. One of the things I'm just tickled by is something that my memory tells me I did probably more than I actually did. But in writing, part of the job of the creative lead is writing art descriptions for all the cards in the set for the artists to go and make the amazing art that graces all these cards. In a number of cases, I wrote a description and included a reference from some old classic piece of art. There's a piece of art featuring a sphere of annihilation, for example, that echoes a piece of art from the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide, with a wizard controlling the sphere from across a river where there's a bunch of orcs. So just being able to nod in the direction of the art that was so formative for me 40 years ago is pretty cool and exciting. The nice little bow wrapped around that is the booster phone in this set, where the art director, Tom Jenkott, was able to bring back some artists who worked on D&D back in those days. So for example, there's a gargoyle card in the set. It has a booster phone piece of art. And I looked at that piece of art and I was like, that looks kind of like a Burbalang. And then I realized that's because the artist who illustrated that gargoyle was the artist who illustrated the Burbalang in the first edition Fiend Folio in 1981 or whatever that was. We got Russ Nicholson to do that illustration. And the Burbalang is a gargoyle-like monster, so it makes sense. But my mind was blown. It was awesome.
I'm having like tingles down my spine hearing that, right? I mean, as a reference, I certainly wouldn't get. And it's so cool to know that throughout the whole set, there are these Easter eggs. So no matter where you started in D&D, you will see something that appeals to you, right? Like for me, I started playing D&D in 3.5 was my first experience with the game. And there's art throughout the set that really echoes that 3.5 feel. There's also stuff from 4th edition, 5th edition, and of course earlier, 1st, 2nd. So seeing that whole history of D&D splayed out in artwork in a card set, that's just amazing. That's so cool.
The other thing that I'm super excited about, speaking of concepting the art for the set, a lot of the times, particularly illustrating monsters in a D&D book, we're giving you almost a scientific illustration of what this creature looks like, right? Here's a displacer beast. It is this thing that looks like a cat. But when we're doing magic art, we're showing you a scene. We're telling a little story. And so when we illustrate a displacer beast on a card, it's like, here is what it looks like to see a displacer beast with this weird distortion effect because you can't quite see where it is. It's not the scientific illustration of a monster manual. It's the first person player view of, oh my gosh, what is that thing? Where is it actually standing? How do I hit it? So that was a thrill for me to be able to commission art like that.
So there is a lot going on here in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. I mean, there's so much cool flavor, and there's something new that's showing up in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms for the first time. And these are what we call flavor words. James, talk to us a little bit about what a flavor word is.
So there's a couple of cards and several cards in the set that have what look like ability words, but really aren't, because they don't carry any mechanical weight. They don't point to a mechanic that unifies the set in any way. But what they do is tell you what a mechanic is doing in the world. I think it's probably easiest to explain if we go straight to an example.
Well, James, that's perfect, because today we have some preview cards featuring ability words. So let's show off one of them, Dawnbringer Cleric. Tell us what is going on here, James.
So this is a great example. This is a cleric with a couple of sort of disparate looking abilities on it. What the flavor words here do is tell you, oh, this is a cleric that's casting one of 3 different spells, right? It's going to cast Cure Wounds to restore your health, or it's going to cast Dispel Magic to get rid of an enchantment, or it's going to cast Gentle Repose to prevent a creature from being turned into an undead creature. These are all spells from the D&D Player's Handbook that a cleric can cast, so they fit on this card. And they unify this disparate set of mechanics and tell you what's going on in the world when you're using these abilities.
And since the beginning of Magic, we have had flavor text, right? And flavor text is amazing for telling the story of a card. And this is kind of an extension of that, right? It's like telling the story of what the card's mechanics are literally doing, which is so cool.
Yeah, exactly. The thing is that, like, there's hundreds of spells in the D&D Player's Handbook, and not that many cards in a Magic set that are spells as opposed to creatures or other card types. So this was a chance for us to inject some of those spells onto cards in a sort of sneaky backhanded way.
This is pretty cool and exciting, and you will find this across all kinds of cards in Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. You'll see all kinds of your favorite D&D abilities and spells show up in this way, so I can't wait for you to see all of them. And that's not the only thing we did to really help communicate the flavor of what is going on in D&D. You've got, of course, these ability words, but also we took a few cards and gave them some unusual naming conventions. James, what tact was given to the names for this set?
I'm going to take a step back and talk about perspective for a second. Anytime we are doing a Magic set set in a specific world, a big job of the creative team is to convey the flavor of that world and help you feel like you're immersed in the world. With Adventures in the Forgotten Realms, there's a second layer to that. We do want you to be immersed in the Forgotten Realms. We want you to get a sense of the grandeur and scope of this world, but we also want to hint at what it feels like to play D&D. One of the ways that we approach that goal is with cards that present you with a choice. They're sort of just like any other modal card, but the way the card is named, it presents you with a situation. You hear something on watch, and then the two options on the card are the two different ways you might respond to that. Are you going to wake up the rest of your party, or are you going to trigger the traps that you've set? So the name of the card sets up the situation. There's flavor words on the card that answer the question posed by that situation, basically, and then there's mechanics that have two different effects.
Yeah, that's a perfect example, and you'll find a number of cards like this in there that really feel like D&D scenarios. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times I've been playing a game of D&D, and yep, you get woken up in the middle of the night, you hear something, and it's like, what do you do, right? What's your move here? And there's a bunch of fun stuff like that throughout the set that I think you all will really enjoy. Another place that shows up, James, too, is on the flavor text of lands, which is not something we normally see, right? But the basic lands in this set have flavor text. Was that something that you worked on as well?
It is, yeah. We went round and round about that. It was an idea that came out of the design team pretty early on. Hey, it would be cool if there were narrative imbued in even these most basic playing pieces of the game, right? And where we ended up was basically each basic land each basic land sets up an adventure scenario. It gives you a hook for something that your characters might be heading off to investigate or explore. I have a fantasy of basically putting together a little mini deck of these 20 basic lands so that I can have them at my D&D table, and I need an adventure idea right away. Here's one.
I just imagine I'm like at the D&D table and I'm like, okay, players, pick your poison. And I lay out a bunch of these basic lands in front of them and allow them to choose which adventure they want to go on, or, pick one at random or something. There's a lot of fun connections there. And I hope that some of these cards will show up in various D&D games.
I hope so. Yeah. It's funny, I ran a lunchtime Ravnica game for some folks on the creative team for a while, and I had a little box beside me at all times with a stack of creature cards, a stack of artifact cards, a stack of spell cards, so that I could randomly generate ideas for myself off the top of my head just by pulling a card out of the box.
So after over 20 years of being at Wizards, James, Adventures in the Forgotten Realms is finally coming out, a love letter to D&D and Magic in one place. This had your handiwork all over it. Is there any message you want to give out to everyone out there seeing this set?
Have fun. We certainly had a ton of fun making it. D&D is fun. Magic is fun. I think go into it in that spirit and you will have a great time. Can't wait.
Well, James, this was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If people want to find you somewhere, is there a social media outlet you prefer? Publicly,
mostly Twitter. I'm Aquela James, Aquela James. On Twitter. That's the D&D world I created when I was in high school.
That's so cool. It's persisted the whole time, right? I mean, it really goes to show how core these elements of gaming are to your entire life. Well, thank you again so much, James, for coming on. It has truly been amazing talking with you.
It's such a pleasure. Your energy is so contagious. It's great.
Perfect. Well, I try. It's easy when you have such an amazing guest. Like, I am literally sitting here excited. I've known James for years. I've worked with James on many projects. I'm sitting here excited to hear these stories about Adventures in the Forgotten Realms because I don't even know all of them. That is so cool. And hearing some of them today was really amazing. So thank you again so much, James. And to everyone out there, go follow James on Twitter. If you have any questions, send them to him. And I hope you all enjoy playing with Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. It is truly an amazing set. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below, and I'll make sure James gets a chance to see them. And I will talk with you again tomorrow when we go even deeper into the Forgotten Realms. Until then, have a lot of fun with your favorite cards. You got this. And finally, we have the green, white, blue Aura of Courage deck, helmed by Gallia, Kindler of Hope. Gallia is a paladin, so she has sworn a sacred oath that fuels her divine power. The Oath of the Ancients is a solemn vow to foster the light of joy and